Princess Zora's 6 fingers trembled as she held the crystalline tablet displaying the imperial decree. The document's edges emitted a soft azure glow, official seal of the High Council pulsing at the bottom. A formality that sealed her fate with cold political precision. "It cannot be changed, Your Luminance," said Elder Velix, her father's most trusted advisor. The elder's skin shimmered with apologetic blue patterns. "The treaty has been negotiated for 7 cycles. The human alliance is necessary for our survival." Zora placed the tablet on her meditation table, forcing her bioluminescent markings to remain neutral despite her inner turmoil. The matching patterns along her arms betrayed her with flickers of distressed orange. "I understand necessity, Elder. What I fail to comprehend is why the humans insisted on marriage rather than a standard diplomatic arrangement." Velix's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture of discomfort among Solarians. "They didn't. The marriage was our council's proposal." The princess froze. "Explain." "The humans are." Velix searched for appropriate words. "Unpredictable. Their history contains more conflict in a single millennium than our entire evolutionary record. Their warriors train from adolescence. Their technology advances through creative destruction rather than harmonious iteration." The Elder activated a holographic display. "This is Commander Ethan Hayes, your intended." The image showed a being with only 2 eyes and alarming bilateral symmetry. No luminescent communication patterns adorned his skin, which appeared disturbingly solid and inflexible. Most unsettling were records of human physical capabilities, their speed, endurance, and tolerance for environments that would kill a Solarian within minutes. "Our analysts believe that binding one of their military leaders through sacred marriage will provide certain safeguards," Velix continued. "The connection may allow us to better predict their intentions." Zora's markings flashed crimson. "You expect me to form a mindlink with this creature? Their emotions are reportedly chaotic enough to cause telepathic shock. Preparations have been made. You'll undergo intensive shielding training before the first meeting." Velix's tone softened. "The diplomatic corps describes Commander Hayes as their most disciplined representative. His psychological evaluations suggest exceptional emotional control for a human." "How reassuring," Zora murmured, studying the image more closely. The human stood rigid in formal attire, decorated with symbols she later learned represented combat achievements. His expression revealed nothing, a trait unsettlingly at odds with Solarian transparency. That night, Zora accessed the restricted Xenobiology database. What she discovered about humans left her unable to achieve meditation trance. Their planet, a death world by Solarian standards, had shaped them into beings who instinctively fought rather than fled. Their bodies contained redundant systems, healing capabilities that bordered on regeneration, and sensory processing that functioned even during unconsciousness. Most disturbing were accounts from the First Contact team. They smile when discussing dangerous situations, one cultural observer noted. They appear to find satisfaction in overcoming conditions that should be physiologically traumatic. As dawn's light filtered through her chamber's crystal walls, Zora made her decision. She would fulfill her royal duty, but she would also prepare herself. She called for her personal guard. "Bring me everything we have on human combat techniques, nervous system vulnerabilities, and psychological pressure points," she instructed. "If I must join with one of these merciless creatures, I will not do so defenseless." Her guard's markings pulsed with concern. "Your Luminance, such knowledge is restricted." Zora's own patterns shifted to Royal Command mode, a genetic legacy of her bloodline. "I am to be bonded with a human warrior for the sake of our people. I believe that constitutes need to know." The human diplomatic vessel entered Solarian orbit with mathematical precision that made the planetary defense minister visibly uncomfortable. Unlike the flowing, organic lines of Solarian ships, the Earth vessel was angular, its symmetry almost aggressive in its efficiency. Princess Zora stood on the ceremonial reception platform, her royal attire designed to enhance her natural luminescence. 3 days of intensive mental shielding practice had left her exhausted but prepared, or so she hoped. The royal telepaths assured her they would monitor the proceedings from a distance, ready to intervene if the human's emotional radiation became overwhelming. "The shuttle approaches, Your Luminance," announced Chief Herald Melix, his patterns flickering with nervous anticipation. Zara steeled herself as the human craft descended. Its engines emitted barely a whisper, technology specifically modified not to disturb Silurian auditory sensitivity, she realized. Perhaps the first indication that these humans were not entirely inconsiderate. The gangway extended and Commander Ethan Hayes emerged. Zara's first surprise was his size. Intelligence reports had emphasized human strength, leading her to expect a towering figure. Instead, Hayes stood only slightly taller than herself, his frame lean rather than hulking. He moved with controlled precision, each step measured as he approached the royal party. His formal uniform was adorned with symbolic decorations that her cultural briefing identified as commendations for duty rather than solely combat achievements. Most striking were his eyes, alert, assessing, missing nothing, yet revealing little. "Your Royal Luminance," Hayes spoke, executing a flawless Silurian greeting gesture with his hands positioned exactly at the culturally appropriate angles. His pronunciation of her formal title was surprisingly accurate for a being without secondary vocal membranes. "On behalf of the Earth Alliance, I bring greetings and hopes for mutual prosperity." Zara extended her hands, palms upward in the traditional response. When Hayes completed the greeting by briefly touching his fingertips to hers, she braced for the telepathic shock her advisors had warned about. It never came. Instead, she encountered carefully constructed mental barriers, not crude blocks but sophisticated patterns that allowed minimal emotional transference while preventing the flood that could harm a Silurian telepath. The discipline required for such control impressed her despite herself. "Commander Hayes," she replied, maintaining royal composure. "Siluria welcomes you." The formal procession moved toward the Crystal Palace, with curious citizens gathering to glimpse the human visitor. Zara noticed Hayes observing everything with quick, efficient glances, his gaze never lingering too long on any single feature, a trait she recognized from her military briefings as constant tactical awareness. During the welcome banquet, Hayes sampled each Silurian delicacy without hesitation, demonstrating either remarkable adaptive biology or tremendous willpower. When Elder Velix inquired about Earth cuisine, Hayes spoke of thousands of culinary traditions with surprising cultural knowledge. The calm formality shattered when a server slipped on the polished floor. The crystalline serving tray with irreplaceable ancient vessels launched into the air. Several Silurians gasped collectively, their patterns flashing dismay. What happened next occurred too quickly for most to follow. Hayes moved with startling speed, catching both falling server and airborne tray in one fluid motion that defied Silurian understanding of possible reaction times. He stabilized both, ensuring not a single vessel broke, then immediately stepped back into his position as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. The banquet hall fell silent. The display of physical capability, previously known only in theoretical briefings, landed with visceral impact. Even Zara's practiced composure faltered, her patterns briefly flashing surprised recognition. "My apologies for the disruption," Hayes said softly, seemingly unaware of the effect his actions had produced. That night, Zara reviewed her security recordings of the incident, playing the sequence repeatedly at reduced speed. The implications were clear. The stories of human capabilities were not exaggerated. If anything, they might be understated. Morning light filtered through the crystalline dome of the ancestral botanical gardens, casting rainbow patterns across ancient vegetation. Princess Zora sought refuge here, away from the constant scrutiny of the court and their whispers about her human betrothed. The gardens had always been her sanctuary, a place where the harmonic resonance of Silurian plant consciousness created a telepathic environment of perfect serenity. She rounded a corner and stopped abruptly. Commander Hayes knelt beside a rare specimen of resonance flora, his posture perfectly still. The plant's sensitive tendrils hovered near his face, a behavior it showed only with beings it found non-threatening. "Your botanical collection is remarkable," Hayes said without turning. "Particularly this adaptive resonator. On Earth, we have carnivorous plants, but nothing with this level of electromagnetic sensitivity." Zora approached cautiously. "How did you know it was me?" A slight smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Your footsteps have a distinct cadence. Plus, the guards at the entrance informed me you visit every morning." He stood with that controlled economy of movement she was beginning to recognize as characteristically human. In the dappled light, she noticed faint lines around his eyes that weren't visible in official photographs. "I recognize your family's evolutionary biology texts in the Imperial Library," Hayes continued. "The Solarian classification system for symbiotic organisms is more elegant than ours." Surprise overtook her practiced royal composure. "You've read our scientific archives. All available materials. Earth's preparation protocols require comprehensive cultural and scientific study before diplomatic engagement. Understanding precedes meaningful connection." Zora allowed herself to drift closer to one of the garden's crystal benches, gesturing for Hayes to join her. Her curiosity temporarily overcame caution. "Your people prepared extensively, yet I sense there is much undisclosed," she observed. "The reports about humans describe beings of remarkable violence and survival instinct. Is this accurate?" Hayes' expression shifted subtly. "Our homeworld shaped us through evolutionary pressure. Earth contains more predatory species, extreme climate variations, and natural disasters than most habitable planets. We adapted. By becoming predators yourselves. By becoming adaptable." His gaze met hers directly, a behavior considered intimate among Solarians. "We fight when necessary, but we prefer not to. Our history contains much conflict, but also continuous efforts to transcend it." Something in his tone resonated with unexpected sincerity. Zara found herself engaging her more sensitive telepathic receptors, carefully probing the edges of his mental barriers. She detected no deception, only carefully controlled emotions, primarily curiosity and genuine interest. Their conversation halted as the garden's perimeter alert system activated with a harmonic tone that caused nearby plants to retract defensively. Palace security guards appeared at the entrance, their patterns flashing urgent signals. "Perimeter breach in Sector 7, reported the lead guard. "Unknown intruder approaching the royal quarters." Hayes moved before Zara could respond, positioning himself between her and the potential threat direction. The shift from scholarly conversation to protective stance happened in an instant, his body language transforming completely. "Your security response time needs improvement," he noted calmly, eyes scanning for tactical information. "What surveillance covers the eastern approach?" The head guard blinked in confusion at the human's authoritative tone. Zara found herself answering instead. "Motion detection and thermal imaging, but the eastern wall borders the reflective pools," she explained. "The water sometimes creates false readings." Hayes nodded. "A deliberate vulnerability exploit. Someone with knowledge of your security systems." The realization struck Zara with sudden clarity. This wasn't random. Someone was testing the human's protective responses toward her, or worse, creating an opportunity to assess his capabilities. As guards escorted them toward the secure central palace, Zara noticed Hayes maintained perfect positioning between her and every potential angle of threat, all while appearing outwardly relaxed. Perhaps, she considered, there were advantages to having a creature evolved for survival at one side. The royal reception hall buzzed with tension as the Marax delegation arrived without prior notification. 6 insectoid figures entered on segmented limbs, their chitinous exoskeletons gleaming under the crystal chandeliers. Solarian courtiers edged away, luminescent patterns betraying collective anxiety. "Your luminance," Elder Valex whispered to Princess Zora. "The Marax rarely leave their territory. Their presence suggests unusual circumstances." Commander Hayes stood at the prescribed diplomatic distance beside Zora, his posture alert but outwardly relaxed. "Trade Consortium insignia on their thorax plates," he murmured. "Upper echelon representatives." Zora glanced at him, surprised. "You recognize Merak's social markings." "Standard diplomatic briefing materials," Hayes replied simply. The lead Merax approached, mandibles clicking in complex patterns. The Universal Translator unit carried by a Solarian aide emitted a series of discordant tones before producing garbled phrases. "Urgent matter. Trade routes compromised. Require immediate safeguard provisions." The translator sparked, emitting a high-pitched whine that caused the Merax to rear back, forelimbs raising in what Zara recognized as a defensive posture. The court interpreter's patterns flashed alarm. "The translation matrix is failing," the interpreter announced. "The Merax dialect contains subsonic components our systems cannot process correctly." The Merax began clicking rapidly, their movements becoming increasingly agitated. Two palace guards shifted subtly, hands moving toward ceremonial weapons that suddenly seemed inadequate against the heavily armored visitors. "They believe we're deliberately obstructing communication," Elder Velex warned. "In their culture, this is deeply offensive." Before Zara could formulate a response, Hayes stepped forward. The movement was deliberate enough to draw attention, but measured enough not to appear threatening. He made a formal gesture of peaceful intent toward the Merax leader, then produced a series of clicks and subsonic hums from his human vocal apparatus that approximated Merax communication patterns. The chamber fell silent except for Hayes' continuing sounds. The Merax delegation froze, multiple compound eyes focusing intently on the human. After a moment that stretched uncomfortably long, the lead Merax lowered its forelimbs and responded with simplified clicking patterns. For several minutes, Hayes engaged in rudimentary communication with the insectoids, occasionally pausing to address Zora. "They've detected unusual energy signatures along their primary shipping routes," he translated. "3 vessels missing. They suspect piracy but acknowledge it could be natural phenomena. They're requesting permission to adjust their route through the outer edge of Solarian space while the matter is investigated." Zara maintained royal composure despite her astonishment. "Tell them permission is granted. We will dispatch observer vessels to assist in the investigation." Hayes conveyed the message in simplified Merax communication sounds. The delegation responded with what appeared to be a gesture of gratitude before departing with considerably less tension than they had arrived with. As the court resumed normal activity, Zara turned to Hayes. "How is it possible you can approximate their language? Even our most skilled linguists require technological assistance." "Necessity," Hayes replied. "In space, misunderstanding can be deadly. We developed phonetic approximation techniques for emergency communication with all known sentient species. It's not fluency, just enough to prevent escalation until proper translation can be established." Elder Velex's patterns displayed reluctant admiration. "You prepared for diplomatic failure in advance." "We prepare for the worst while hoping for the best," Hayes said. "Human history taught us that lesson repeatedly." That evening, Zara accessed the Human Diplomatic Database through her authorized channels, discovering hundreds of cultural adaptation protocols developed specifically to avoid conflict. Each contained contingency plans for communication breakdown, cultural misunderstanding, and biological incompatibility. For a species depicted as warriors, humans appeared to invest extraordinary effort in preventing confrontation rather than winning it. Perhaps, Zara considered as she closed the files, she had misunderstood what made humans dangerous. It wasn't merely their capacity for violence, but their meticulous preparation for every possibility, including peace. The orbital shipyard gleamed against the backdrop of Solaria's azure atmosphere, a masterpiece of crystalline engineering that had taken 3 generations to complete. Princess Zora led the diplomatic tour alongside Commander Hayes and a contingent of dignitaries from 5 allied systems. The excursion served dual purposes: showcasing Solarian technological achievements and allowing allies to assess the human representative in a less formal setting. The harmonic resonance stabilizers prevent microfractures during stellar wind events, explained Chief Engineer Neelix, gesturing toward the transparent outer sections. Our vessels merge biological elements with crystal matrices, creating ships that respond to crew intention patterns. Hayes observed everything with measured interest, asking questions that revealed surprising knowledge of deep space navigation and quantum field dynamics. Several Allied representatives appeared unsettled by his technical comprehension. Your species achieved faster-than-light travel remarkably quickly, noted a Vixilian ambassador, compound eyes blinking in vertical patterns that suggested suspicion. Some wonder what evolutionary pressures created such urgency in humans. Before Hayes could respond, emergency tones resonated through the structure. The shipyard's illumination shifted to emergency frequency, bathing everyone in pulsing amber light. Pressure anomaly detected in Section 14, announced an automated system. Emergency protocols initiated. Please proceed to designated evacuation points. The diplomatic party moved toward the nearest transit hub, but the doors sealed before they reached it. Chief Engineer Neelix's patterns flashed distress as he accessed a control terminal. The automated response has malfunctioned, he reported, voice wavering. It's reading our life signs as unauthorized entities. The system is treating this as a security breach rather than an evacuation. A subtle shift in atmospheric pressure confirmed his assessment. The observation gallery where they stood was slowly decompressing. Hayes immediately stepped forward. How long before critical pressure loss? 12 minutes at current rates, Neelix responded. Emergency systems should have activated. No time, Hayes interrupted, scanning the chamber. We need manual override access. Where's the nearest maintenance junction? While Solarian officials communicated in rapid pattern speech, Hayes moved to an auxiliary panel and removed a multi-tool from his diplomatic uniform. The ambassador from Vexilia watched with widening eye membranes. You carry tools in formal attire. Always, Hayes replied, already working. Princess, I need your authorization to access emergency protocols. Zora placed her palm against the panel, royal biopatterns granting highest access. Hayes worked with methodical efficiency, bypassing damaged systems while instructing the others to apply emergency breather units from wall compartments. The primary junction is behind that bulkhead, Neelix said, pointing to a sealed door. But the emergency release is disabled. Hayes assessed the situation, then moved to the door. The pressure differential is increasing. We have minutes, not hours. What happened next would be discussed in royal security briefings for months afterward. Hayes braced himself against the frame and applied force to the sealed door, force that should have been impossible for any single being. Metal groaned as the door separated just enough to allow access to the manual override. Working through increasing decompression effects that had several Xilarians struggling to remain conscious, Hayes reconfigured the junction. Emergency systems reactivated, stabilizing pressure and restoring proper evacuation routes. In the medical center afterward, the diplomatic party recovered while discussing the incident in hushed tones. Princess Zora observed Hayes from across the room as a medic examined him. His uniform sleeve was rolled up, revealing a patchwork of old scars, evidence of numerous past injuries. You've suffered greatly, she observed, approaching his examination table. Hayes shrugged slightly. We heal. It's one of our talents. You prioritized others' evacuation before securing your own safety, Zara noted. Your actions were not what I expected. Something unreadable crossed his expression. What did you expect, Your Luminance? The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither was prepared to address fully. For the first time since their meeting, Zara found herself without a diplomatic response. I'm beginning to believe, she finally said, that my expectations were incomplete. Premarital cultural exchange is mandated by the Ancestral Accords, Elder Valex explained as he escorted Princess Zara and Commander Hayes to the ceremonial chambers. For 10 generations, no royal union has proceeded without this sacred sharing. 3 days had passed since the shipyard incident. Rumors of Hayes' actions had spread throughout the palace, transforming wary glances into curious observation. The human's reputation had shifted from feared outsider to unpredictable enigma. The exchange chamber was a perfect hemisphere of living crystal, its walls pulsing with soft bioluminescence that responded to emotional states. At its center stood 2 meditation pedestals arranged to face each other. Traditionally, this ceremony involves telepathic communion, Zara explained, feeling suddenly self-conscious. Given your species' mental structure, we've prepared alternatives. Hayes nodded. I studied the protocols. With your permission, I'd like to attempt a modified version of the traditional approach. Elder Valex's patterns flashed surprise. Human minds are not compatible with our telepathic fields. The emotional intensity could harm both parties. I've been working with Dr. Keller from our xenobiology team, Hayes replied. We've developed neural dampening techniques that might allow a limited connection. Zara studied him with renewed curiosity. You would willingly open your mind to telepathic contact. Most species find the prospect invasive. Cultural understanding requires vulnerability, Hayes said simply. I can't fully comprehend Solarian society without experiencing its foundational communication method. The chamber was cleared of all but essential personnel. Zara took her position on a crystalline pedestal, her formal attire designed to enhance telepathic conductivity. Hayes sat opposite her, removing a small device from his pocket and placing it at the base of his skull. Neural dampener, he explained. It will modulate my thought patterns to safer frequencies for Solarian perception. Zara initiated the connection with delicate precision, expecting resistance. Instead, she encountered carefully structured thoughts, like a mental antechamber specifically prepared for her arrival. Beyond it lay deeper consciousness, protected but not entirely hidden. Hayes had organized his thoughts into accessible concepts, Earth's diverse environments from snow-capped mountains to vast oceans, human art spanning centuries of development, music that ranged from simple melodies to complex symphonies. Each memory was carefully curated to convey human experience without overwhelming her telepathic senses. In return, Zara shared Solarian thought sculptures, intricate mental constructs that told stories through emotional resonance rather than linear narrative. She guided Hayes through simplified versions of childhood memory patterns and ceremonial thought forms that defined her culture's collective consciousness. When they finally separated, the chamber's crystalline walls pulsed with harmonized patterns reflecting their shared experience. Remarkable, Elder Valex whispered, his own patterns displaying astonishment. The human maintained coherent thought structure throughout the exchange. Hayes blinked several times, readjusting to normal consciousness. Your people's mental landscape is beautiful, he said to Zara. The interconnectedness of your thought patterns explains much about your society's emphasis on harmony. That evening, a conservative noble publicly questioned the appropriateness of the exchange during a formal dinner. Can a creature evolved for conflict truly appreciate the subtleties of telepathic communion? He asked, patterns conveying dismissive skepticism. Or does the human merely mimic understanding for diplomatic advantage? Rather than showing offense, Hayes responded with unexpected insight. Appreciation doesn't require identical experience, he said. Humans evolved in environments that demanded cooperation alongside competition. We understand harmony's value precisely because we've witnessed its absence. The noble's patterns shifted to reluctant acknowledgement. Later, walking through moonlit palace gardens, Zara found herself watching Hayes with new perception. You surprised me today, she admitted. Few non-telepathic beings willingly open their minds to others. Hayes gazed upward at Solaria's twin moons. Sometimes understanding requires seeing through another's eyes, he replied. Or in this case, feeling through another's thoughts. Zara realized, with mild surprise, that she was looking forward to their next exchange. 3 cycles before the wedding ceremony, Princess Zara noticed a subtle shift in palace security patterns. More guards stationed at peripheral junctions, scanning equipment recalibrated to higher sensitivity. Commander Hayes likewise seemed more vigilant, his gaze frequently sweeping entry points during diplomatic functions. "Your security forces detected something," Hayes remarked during an evening walk along the Resonance Gardens. His voice remained casual, but his posture had changed. "How did you know?" Zora asked. "Deployment patterns change. Response times during shift changes shortened by approximately 12 seconds. A slight smile. "I noticed details. Anti-union factions have become more vocal," Zora admitted. "Intelligence reports suggest possible disruptive action rather than mere protest." Hayes nodded. "I've reviewed the reports. Your security chief has implemented appropriate countermeasures." Their conversation was interrupted by an aide rushing toward them, patterns flashing urgent communication. "Your Luminance, your presence is requested in the Grand Symposium immediately. An incident has occurred." The symposium chamber buzzed with chaotic pattern speech when they arrived. Several Xilarian officials surrounded a delegation of human diplomatic staff who appeared disoriented, some clutching their heads in obvious distress. "What happened?" Zara demanded. Chief Medical Officer Telrix approached, patterns conveying grave concern. An unknown device activated during the cultural presentation. It emitted frequencies specifically calibrated to human neurological patterns. "Most of your delegation is experiencing severe sensory disruption." Hayes surveyed the scene with narrowed eyes, then suddenly pressed his palm against the wall to steady himself. His composed expression faltered, muscles tensing visibly. "Commander." Zara moved closer. "Delayed effect," he managed, voice strained. "Clever. Initial pulse disrupts higher cognitive functions. Secondary harmonics target pain receptors." Even as he spoke, Hayes sank to one knee, struggling to maintain consciousness. His breathing became measured, deliberate, fighting the effect through sheer discipline. "Get him to the medical bay," ordered Telrix. "No," Hayes countered. "This is specifically designed for human physiology. Standard medical procedures won't help. Need to locate source." Despite advisors urging retreat, Zara knelt beside Hayes. "How can I assist you?" "Your telepathic abilities," he said through gritted teeth. "The attack targets neural pathways. You might be able to help me construct mental barriers." The implications were clear. She would need to fully enter his mind, not just the prepared outer chambers she had accessed during their cultural exchange. The risk of telepathic shock was significant. "It's dangerous," she warned. "Trust goes both ways," Hayes replied, meeting her gaze despite his pain. Zara placed her hands gently on either side of his face, initiating deep telepathic connection. The experience overwhelmed her senses immediately, a maelstrom of human consciousness far more complex than she had anticipated. Unlike their controlled exchange, this was Hayes' complete mental landscape. Tactical analysis operating alongside emotional responses, memories intertwined with sensory processing. She witnessed flashes of Earth's landscapes, intense combat scenarios, diplomatic training sessions, and countless moments of human interaction. Most surprising were his thoughts about her. Genuine respect, careful consideration of her comfort during every interaction, and a growing affection he had deliberately shielded to avoid making her uncomfortable. Together they constructed mental barriers against the attack, Zora guiding Hayes through Xilarian thought protection techniques, while he supplied the discipline to implement them. As his mind stabilized, they simultaneously identified the attack's resonance pattern. "Northeast section, maintenance level 3, Hayes stated, rising shakily to his feet. "The device is still active." Security teams dispatched immediately, guided by their combined analysis. "You entered my mind completely," Hayes noted quietly as medical staff attended the other affected humans. "That couldn't have been pleasant for you." Zara's patterns shifted through several emotions before settling on a configuration Hayes had never seen. "It was not what I expected," she admitted. "Your mind is not what I was told human minds would be." "And what was that?" "Chaotic, driven by aggression, Her patterns shifted again. But your thoughts are ordered, disciplined, and surprisingly. Yes, Hayes prompted when she hesitated. Kind, she finished. Even your tactical assessments prioritize protection over conquest. For the first time, Hayes appeared momentarily at a loss for words. The grand ceremonial chamber of the Crystal Palace glittered with the combined light of 1,000 bioluminescent decorations. Dignitaries from 17 systems gathered to witness the union that would solidify the human-Xelarian alliance. What had begun as a political necessity had transformed into something entirely unexpected. Princess Zara stood before the mirror as attendants made final adjustments to her ceremonial attire. Traditional Xelarian bonding garments flowed like liquid crystal around her form, but subtle modifications incorporated elements of Earth formal design, a gesture of cultural integration that had been her own idea. The human delegation reports Commander Hayes is prepared, announced Elder Velex, his patterns displaying a complex mixture of emotions. The security sweep detected no further threats. Thank you, Elder, Zara replied. Has the special request been implemented? Yes, Your Luminance, though many on the council questioned the wisdom of altering a ceremony unchanged for generations. Zara's patterns shifted to royal authority. Some traditions must evolve to remain meaningful. The ceremonial procession moved through corridors lined with observers, their patterns shifting from curiosity to something approaching acceptance. The sabotage attempt had unexpectedly generated sympathy for the humans, whose disciplined response and refusal to demand retribution had impressed even conservative factions. Commander Hayes waited at the central dais, wearing a formal uniform modified to incorporate Xelarian crystalline elements that responded to his bioelectrical field. The sight momentarily took Zora's breath away, a perfect visual representation of their unexpected journey from strangers to partners. The High Efficient began the ancient words of binding resonant tones filling the chamber. When the moment came for the traditional Mindlink confirmation, Hayes stepped forward with a small device in his palm. With respect for Xelarian tradition and acknowledgement of our biological differences, he said, voice carrying through the chamber, I present this offering. The device unfolded into an intricate neural interface, its design clearly combining human technology with Xelarian crystalline components. A permanent telepathic bridge, Hayes explained to the assembled witnesses, developed by our combined scientific teams to allow ongoing mental connection without risk of telepathic shock to either party. Murmurs spread through the gathering as the implications became clear. This was not merely a diplomatic tool, but a lifetime commitment to genuine understanding between their species. As the interface activated, creating a sustainable connection between their minds, Zara experienced the moment of revelation she had once dreaded but now welcomed. Hayes' thoughts flowed into hers with controlled precision, respect, determination, and the unmistakable warmth of genuine affection. In return, she allowed him to feel her own journey from fear to understanding, from reluctant duty to willing partnership. The formal ceremony concluded with an announcement that surprised many: the establishment of a joint diplomatic academy where humans and Xelarians would train together, each learning from the other's strengths. Later, in the privacy of the royal gardens, Hayes spoke the words that had remained unspoken through their tumultuous introduction. I was equally terrified of marrying a telepath, he admitted, his normally controlled expression more open than she had ever seen it. Humans fear being truly known. Zora's luminescent patterns shifted to a configuration Hayes had come to recognize as genuine warmth. And we fear never truly connecting, she responded, reaching out to bridge the final gap between their worlds with a touch of her hand to his. As their fingers intertwined, Zora reflected on how completely her expectations had been overturned. The merciless human she had dreaded had revealed himself to be complex, disciplined, and capable of extraordinary compassion. What began as her nightmare had become the foundation for an unprecedented partnership, both personal and interstellar. In the distance, the twin moons of Xelaria rose over a world forever changed by the union of two beings who had dared to look beyond fear and truly see each other.